I give this advice today. It's easier in perspective. Everything's easy. It's very easy for me to give advice today because I've done practically everything wrong that you could go wrong to over 12 years. But you have to love what you do, and you have to think about it as almost like a lifetime to some extent, which is maybe a little bit scary. But
welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence podcast. It is a huge pleasure and frankly going to be a lot of fun to have my amazing, wonderful sister-in-law, who is actually one of the most impressive entrepreneurs I also happen to know, with me today, Heidi Zak. Thank you so much for joining.
yay, excited to be here.
Yes. And so for those who don't know, I mean, Heidi has this amazing career. So Heidi is someone who, and I hope you don't mind me putting this way, Heidi, I mean, you went to Duke undergrad, you then went to MIT for business school, you worked at McKinsey, you've done all these amazing jobs and sort of run this sort of amazing track, sort of traditional track, I would say, in some ways, right?
Yep.
And yet here you are, 12 years later now, as the CEO of ThirdLove, one of the better known brands in the lingerie space, and probably frankly a really well-known brand just generally. It's been this amazing career journey for you. And so I want to talk through some of those things. But before we even dive into sort of the history of your past and why you took the direction you did, maybe let's start with a question that I try to ask everybody to kick it off, which is, this is called the Entrepreneurial Excellence podcast. How do you define excellence as an entrepreneur?
It's a great question. I saw that one. I'm like, I don't even know how I'm going to answer it. And I did not prep. So everything is on the fly. I don't like to prep much because you want it to be authentic. Really, I guess what I've learned is to be an excellent entrepreneur, you need to be able to roll with the ups and downs because they're constant. And there's, as I say, it's like there's always something. And to be an excellent entrepreneur, you have to be able to get through those moments that are down moments with positivity and grit. And then when you have up moments, it means being able to contain yourself. And I think not getting over your skis, which I just think a lot of we see it happen all the time. I mean, there's stories in the media. And so I think walking that line, and in essence, I guess what I mean is, I think it's important to be humble. I even when you introduce me, it makes me feel awkward. I'm like, really? And I think there's something to that is important for longevity of success as an entrepreneur.
And when you think through that, so I mean, I agree, but if you think through like lots of entrepreneurs, right? All the entrepreneurs and even think through one thing, going back to even your schooling days, right? You've all these impressive, like everyone who gets to Duke, everyone who goes to MIT has these impressive backgrounds, and they probably think of themselves as really gritty, really resilient, all these things. Yet many of them have probably taken very traditional career paths, and some of them might not even be working anymore. And yet here you are 12 years later doing ThirdLove still. What is the thing that you think stand out? And once again, not even just compared to those people, but also other people who started companies with you 12 years ago. I bet many of them are not even doing companies still. What is the difference?
You have to love what you do. So, and I get this question a lot, like, how do I know if I should start a company? And even me, like, I give this advice today. It's easier in perspective. Everything's easy. It's very easy for me to give advice today because I've done practically everything wrong that you could go wrong to over 12 years. But you have to love what you do, and you have to think about it as almost like a lifetime to some extent, which is maybe a little bit scary. But this idea of like in and out in 5 years, which is kind of maybe what I had in my head when I started, which is laughable, because it doesn't happen of course there's exceptions, but like most people, the journey's long. And the question is like, how much do you love it? Like, how much do you love what you do? I mean, it can be whatever. It doesn't matter what it is, but you have to really love it. So I think a lot of people think they love it, but I don't think they deeply love what they do or have a passion to do it for 10 years or 20 years. That's one piece of it. And then I think there's sort of the how hard and how much are you willing to put in to not fail?
Yep.
I mean, it's a really something, I'm sure you've had it too. Like you have these moments where you're just like, this is really hard. Like I am spending a lot of energy on something that feels super hard, that feels like I don't know how I'm going to get to the next thing that I need to do. And somehow, and that I don't know what that is, I think that's the special sauce. That's the thing that gets you to stay in it and not quit.
It'll be actually kind of an interesting probably discussion too for us to have, right? You and I have both been entrepreneurs for about the same amount of time, but you've been at one company the whole time, and I've done 4 different companies.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure which one's crazier, to be clear, but it's sort of an interesting contrast. But to go to your point about like, loving it and being passionate about it, right? Think back to the early days of starting ThirdLove.
Yeah.
Like, did you know you would be passionate about lingerie, or was it just like, I'm passionate about starting this thing because this should exist in the world? Like, what was that defining passion, and maybe how has that passion probably changed over 12 years?
No, that's a great question too. Yes. I was never passionate about lingerie, and people ask me that. It used to ask me, it's like, oh, were you like into like, you bought like different brand? And I'm like, no, I was just like a woman shopping at Victoria's Secret, like as one does or did at the time. So I was an average consumer, but at the time, and I think what drove us probably for the first, call it, 7 to 8 years at least, was really what the industry was. And I mean that at large, and specifically, I mean that around Victoria's Secret, when you have this one big player who's so antiquated and tone deaf, and just all the things that kind of sum up like what was wrong in the world of generally apparel at large, like the lack of inclusivity and just this, this like cookie cutter view of what beauty is and how many sizes brands produce, like some of these macro things that have fully evolved in the course of the past 10 years. There's a lot of really inherent big areas that I felt like needed to be changed in the world. And it took a long time to even start to see how we impacted those changes. Now, that was the beginning. And now today it's kind of flipped, where we have such an avid community of ThirdLove customers, and hearing from them about how we positively impacted their life, what they want to see from us, and being engaged with sort of the community is actually more what drives me today than the idea of, fully like changing an industry. Because in some ways I don't want to say like we did it, but we did it. There's a reason why bra brands, all these bra brands exist today. And there's a reason why Victoria's Secret even looks the way it does today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You guys changed the name in what it meant to be a lingerie brand, which is kind of an amazing thing to like say you were the push that changed a whole industry for 50% of the population, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
And what did you, even thinking, once again, going back to that, like the founding story, and a question I think a lot of people have is around like, what were the elements of like sort of why, like, okay, like you're an average consumer, average shopper. Yes, you're a woman, but sure, there's lots and lots of women out there who shop for lingerie. Was it your ability or your co-founder's ability, like identifying that this seems like a market ripe for disruption, versus being like, I'm super passionate about it? Because sometimes people would say like, I've done it 4 different times, and there's lots of different things I'm passionate about. But in the end, the most successful companies are the ones that are riding a wave or really making a change in a big market. So what was it about identifying the market versus just like, I'm passionate about making lingerie better because Victoria's Secret is terrible with the way they do things?
Yeah. I think I got bitten by like the entrepreneurial bug out here, which didn't really, the tech community at the time in New York before moving out here, I don't think there was as much of the startup community. Like today, there is a much bigger community there. So it hadn't even really crossed my mind. And then getting out here and meeting a lot of other founders of a lot of different companies in the early days, heyday, like 2011, 2012, like a bunch of just, some of them are around and some aren't today, but some of the bigger companies, I really got inspired by the fact that you could rally a bunch of people around, going after a big idea and kind of changing the world. And all of it is slightly crazy. Like that is what makes entrepreneurs and companies work. It's like the ideas have to be a little bit unachievable to some extent. And so how it went down, there was other ideas that were bounced around at the time. And my husband, your brother, was at a VC firm, and he was doing a lot in e-commerce. And I had been in retail prior to working at Google, and I missed it. And so I really missed the consumer space because I love tangible goods. Like at the end of the day, it's really hard, but I like knowing someone can like you consume, use, wear the product. And so bras just happened to be something that was an aha for me. And then as we dug into the market, it was super clear. It's like huge market, one player who kind of owned 50% of the market. It depends what data. I mean, that's a big percent in any industry. There was no other subcategory of apparel where you'd such one large player who drove, the vast amount of revenue in it. And they were really reliant on physical retail, as most huge incumbent retailers were. And so there's a big opportunity. And as you're talking about like riding the trend, I mean, again, it's funny to say it today because it seems silly, but the trend was e-commerce.
Yeah.
Which
was a thing. I mean, still, obviously, it's not the only thing.
Yeah. And D2C didn't exist. So like direct to consumer didn't exist. Shopify didn't exist. Right. And there was a couple nascent brands that were being started online. And when we pitched the seed round, there was a lot of like, how are you ever going to get a woman to even buy a bra online? It's so hard to fit. Like she's never going to buy that kind of purchase. Like she's never going to buy some random bra brand like that she hasn't heard of. And so there's a lot of pushback against even what I just said, which is obviously super core to what we do every single day at the company.
I mean, that's probably like every founder has some pushback, right? If it's a crazy enough of an idea, someone's gonna be like, there's no chance it's gonna work ever. This hasn't been done before. Why would it be successful in this case? Obviously, you guys were able to convince a lot of folks to do it. But before we get to that part too, like how much research did you and your co-founder, my brother, Dave, do to think through like was it like you two were like, we think we're gonna be badass co-founders together and we want to start a company and let's go research a ton of markets? Or is it sort of like Dave, when he has time at Sequoia, was like, I've been researching this market. I view this as a great opportunity. Heidi, you have this amazing background in retail. This is an idea, like perfect combination of all these circumstances. Or did you like really dig into like, let's do something in D2C, but it could be sportswear, shoes, like, I don't know, you name it, but like, and then just bra was what you settled on.
Yeah. It's like if I was doing it over again today, I'd probably be more, I'd like to think I'd be more strategic and thoughtful, before diving in, but maybe that was like the blessing of not having done it before. I was pretty sure that bras in particular was the right market. And then we did a lot of research around that. We did survey work. We kind of asked customers, where do you shop from? Are you happy? Would you buy a bra online? What holds you back from buying a bra? A lot of it was around fit. So we had some really interesting ideas around fit technology, even back then in 2012, 2013, which really actually have truly come to life of late the past year or two, which has been interesting to see that market really kind of grow. But so there was some key research we did into the market. And then really what it boiled down to was, if we don't do this, like, and somebody else does, like, how are we going to feel? And that was really the impetus to say, let's do it, because I'm kind of like, these other companies will be here and we can go back. If we fail, it will likely make us a better actually employee at any kind of company to have tried something. And so that was really how it came about. It was not like, oh no, we have a list of 10 things and we're narrowing it down to one. There was like other ideas before ThirdLove that were like not good, and I can't remember specifics like what they were, but there were some where we looked at them and were like, no, it's not going to work. Yeah. Market's not big enough, or whatever it was.
And so then what, like, so kind of two different ways I want to maybe go with this, but like maybe one, you spoke a little bit about fundraising and like going to convince VCs and things like this was the idea to go build. How did you kind of deal with the overall pitch to some extent, like the high level of like, hey, like I'm doing this with my husband, which has its like risk factors, but probably strengths. Another one also, as a female founder, like there probably was some sexism involved, especially when you're dealing with this sort of awkward thing where you're pitching probably mostly to male VCs and you're talking about female lingerie, which is clearly a space like they're probably like, I need to go ask my wife, which is not a standard response you get from a VC to go ask their spouse about whether they should make an investment. How did you guys deal with that? In what was the value or importance also of like co-founder fit in part of the pitch?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it absolutely made it easier to raise money to have a male co-founder, especially in 2013. And I wouldn't know how that holds today, but it's probably still true to some extent, though I'm sure it's gotten a little better. So certainly, I think it made it easier. We did talk a lot about the technology too, because a big piece of what we were building wasn't just the brand and the product, which was a piece of it, but was really how are we going to solve what we would call like the sizing issue, but do it in a digital environment. And so there definitely had a tech component too, which was probably an easier thing to spend time on in a lot of the meetings. And was super important and is still today to ThirdLove and how we're different in the space. But specifically, yeah, I mean, I think, look, we pitched so many people, we heard so many no's. I mean, there was a range, but yeah, I mean, there was all kinds of stuff. One of the guys, I remember he said, we only invest in this firm and things we understand. And we're like, really? I mean, he was investing in all this other stuff, which let's be clear, like they didn't deeply understand, like,
Yeah, totally.
and lots of like, get the EA to come into the meeting, like have her sit there in the pitch meeting. I mean, really, really awkward situations for both that person as well as like me. It was just some really not great dynamics, but yeah, I mean, we got it done.
And when you think through like the tech piece as well, so I know the tech's important to you guys, but do you think the value of the tech, a lot of companies think overplay the value of tech to some extent, where they're like, tech is the most important thing, and then maybe it's not. And so like, how did that play out in reality from you guys? Like, yes, tech's important still, but actually there's all these other elements that maybe aren't as sexy,
yes,
but arguably are more important. How did that play out for you guys early on? I maybe helped you fundraise, but then what did it look like from a execution standpoint?
Yeah, I think the tech definitely helped us fundraise for sure, but it actually was super important when we launched because we originally had an app and we launched without a website. So you had to download the app on the App Store to leverage the sizing technology, and you could only shop through the app. We added a website 6 months after launch. So we were very high tech when we launched, and we learned a lot from that. We got a lot of early adopters. And then we realized that like a lot of people weren't going to download an app and they weren't going to use an app to size themselves. And if that was going to be the case, how were we going to get from 10,000 customers to 100,000 to 1 million customers? And really, that's when we decided to move things from the app into the web. But it's still really important. So today we still have our fitting room. Over 20 million women have done the fitting room. We have a massive data set. We use that in everything we do. So behind the scenes, it's important. But of course, as our customer base has grown, our brand has grown. I mean, at the end of the day, we are a product-driven brand company. And that is the most important thing, is the physical product, which correlates to the brand. But I do think the tech is still an important component for us, but wouldn't say it's the most important thing.
When you think through, actually on the sort of too, when you think through like, what is the most important thing? So if you're an entrepreneur in general, forget even ThirdLove to some extent, do people care about the underlying tech? Do they get like, what do you think people are buying? Like, do they buy ThirdLove? They don't buy ThirdLove because there's a great sizing algorithm. They buy because it's a great bra and it has a great brand. It makes them feel good. How should every entrepreneur think through those sorts of elements?
Yeah, I think technology, I mean, for most businesses, even B2B, right? It's not about the technology. It's about the outcome or the solution that you provide for your customer, whether that's a company or a person, B2C. I mean, it's all one and the same. So for me, but again, it's like, how does it make her life? It's just like, how does it make her life easier? Like, what do we do to make her life better? So what's super fascinating, even today, is 85% of our customers have done the fitting room. So the vast majority of women, even though we're far along and have over 5 million customers, et cetera, like they're using the fitting room. And the repeat customer who comes back is using the fitting room because she's changed size or she lost or gained weight and she doesn't know what she needs. And so the tool doesn't go away. Is that the reason she buys from us? No. But does she trust us as a fit expert and as someone who's going to be there to like walk her through? Yes. So I think it's important. And so I think technology should always be not tech for the sake of tech, but tech for the sake of solving a problem, making something more efficient, right? Providing real value to someone. And if it's in that context, you shouldn't even really need to talk about it because it should just be integrated into like whatever the experience is.
Yeah, it's almost like natural. That's just
as much as it can be. And I think that also has evolved a lot today to make it easier to have things like that be more seamless.
Walk me through as well. So the other part for you guys, there aren't obviously that many. Well, there's plenty of them out there, but like hard, like D2C companies, right? So I haven't talked with many of them. What are the challenges that you guys face at the time of like manufacturing, right? You're this small company, raise a bit of money. I don't know how much in the beginning, but like not that much, right? You have to now go convince some factory to go make bras for you. I still remember David like going to Mexico and then over to China, trying to figure out all these factories that can create a high quality product. Because in the end, once again, like that's how you're going to get customers, the quality product that fits, that does everything you need to do. What was that journey like on actually like sort of, for a tech company, you might be building software. For you had software, but you also need to actually manufacture and buy it and store it and then ship it and all these other steps that are foreign to a lot of software companies.
Yes. I mean, those are all the things. I mean, and one of the things that made it even more challenging back then is that the supply chain ecosystem wasn't as accessible as it is today and open. Today, if you want to go manufacture something, it's not as hard as it used to be to figure out who the manufacturers are or to get a sample run or to go to Alibaba. There's like lots of things you can do. I mean, I actually popped up on my Google Home the other day. It was photos of us in 2012 in China, and we didn't have a website yet. So we had no brand. Imagine this.
Yeah.
We go over to China. Yeah. Don't even have a brand name. Hadn't even landed on ThirdLove. And you go kind of walk around Shenzhen and like try to talk to manufacturers about this company you are going to launch that you want to have half cup sizes, which they think is a crazy idea and don't want to do. And everyone's kind of like nodding their head and like, get out of here. I mean, it was not uplifting, and we did not line up a manufacturing partner. I think we were there 3 or 4 weeks. We were there a long time. So we came back and we eventually landed on manufacturing in Mexico at the beginning, which was a whole nother thing. But that part was super hard. Again, I do think barriers to entry today are lower. But yeah, there's always hurdles. And I think there's especially, as anyone who's super early stage knows, when you have no brand or you have no customers, I mean, it is, yeah, it's a lot. Like you're every day, like you're in it, until you're not. Until you kind of get through that period of trying to build your beta or your prototype or whatever you call it.
So what was the secret then of like actually pushing through, right? So, okay, fine, you go raise this money. How did you push through to convince some, it's the same sort of selling VC. It's sort of the same probably for factories. Like, please produce our product.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of like you're pitching. I mean, I just heard that, right. A lot of what we do as founders is sales. Like you're selling investors, you're selling companies to join, or employees to join your company. You're selling partners, you're selling vendors. I mean, you are in a sales job. And so there was a manufacturer that really, for some reason, gravitated towards like, you could be the next Victoria's Secret. Like we are willing to take this risk. Like we kind of pitch like, you want to be with the, like these, all these brands that have been here 30 years, or you want to try something different. Like, and we did find a partner who at a certain point in time did nod their head and say like, yeah, this is interesting enough that we're willing to try this with you. But you got to find the person who has that mentality. And if you think about it, most manufacturing partners, like they want a huge order. They want to work with who they know is going to pay the bills. They want to work with who they've worked with. Like, why do they want to take risk? They're not incentivized to take risks. Actually, a small new company is a total pain in the butt. I'm like, the orders are small. They're worried about who you are. Like the whole thing is not, there's a reason they say no all the time.
So then storytelling is a really, really critical point. How did you get good at storytelling, or do you think you are good at storytelling today? What's your secret?
I would say my co-founder, Dave, I think was much better at storytelling in the early days. I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot from doing it over time. I think I've gotten much better. And the more you see other founders talk and tell their stories, and the more people you meet in the ecosystem, I think you really do learn from osmosis. And even today, I'll meet different founders that I know or don't know, and I'll hear them speak at conferences. And it's just, you're a student of what works. And like at the end of the day, people love stories. And so nobody wants to sit around and hear me say, and there were 3 pillars of ThirdLove's brand, and they're like fit and marketing and et cetera, right? Like, of course, like, those are truth. But what I would do is like, I would tell a story about how we wrote the open letter to Victoria's Secret. I would tell the story about going to China and hearing no, and how like people remember actual literal stories. And so I really evolved from being what I would call pretty stiff, I think stiff and not really as relatable, to being very much myself and laughing and saying all like or whatever I'm not supposed to do, and not worrying as much about that, and just worrying more about saying something that someone will recall and being really authentic. And for me, that really worked. And I think that might be more of a female thing versus a male thing, but and I've gotten really good at public speaking. I go on TV and I can do things that people are like, oh my gosh, that's so hard. How do you do that? I'm like, because I've done it enough that I've gotten comfortable and I've gotten good at doing it because I've done it.
Are there any hacks that you would give people or suggest to people, since you have to still get comfortable by doing it, you have to get out there, but you have to still take that first step and do it.
Yeah.
So what are those recommendations? Is it pitching to your friends, your family? Like what are the things to get practice?
Recording yourself is good. And trying to be as natural as possible. Like I remember at one point someone was like, you use your hands too much. So then I remember I was like on Bloomberg and I had like my hands like down, and it made it really hard because I just was so, and I'm like, you know what? If I move my hand on camera, it's going to be fun. Like there's a lot of things. So, I mean, there are coaches that can help, but yes, I think recording yourself, staying natural, and really saying stories enough and repeating them enough that they become second nature to you. Not that they're rehearsed and that you say it the same way every time, but that you try to, I feel like it's kind of like what I think a stand-up comedian probably does. Like they say it and they maybe say it another way and they see how it lands and you kind of learn from it and then you evolve it. It's sort of, you got to suss out what you think is landing.
Do you change your story for different audiences? Like when you're talking on a podcast versus on TV versus to VCs versus to your board versus to your team, is there a different Heidi that each one of those groups gets?
I think so, because it also depends on the medium for sure. I mean, TV is super short. You have to hit on your points. I have the points. I know what they are. I know how to say them. I know what's memorable because I've asked people like, what do you remember? And yeah, of course, the way you pitch is different and how you talk to your company. I would say how I talk to my company and maybe how I would talk on a podcast is probably pretty similar. But there's definitely distinct other audiences that would be more or less buttoned up, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so going from the storytelling part, going back to about like co-founder stuff, what is in your mind is it important to have a co-founder? What sort of qualities do you look for in a co-founder? And then of course, talk about why you decided to have your co-founder be your husband. Like that can be probably really great in many cases, but I think we also know stories of co-founders who are husband-wife teams who get divorced
Totally.
because you're literally in it all the time and you can't take a break, basically. So like, what are the pros and cons of that for co-founding in general, but also husband-wife team co-founding?
Yes. I wonder if those couples, if they hadn't started a company together, would they or would they not have been divorced? I've always wondered. We'll never know.
Yep.
So co-founder, I mean, it's the most important relationship you have, it is the most important relationship you have. And I think it's make or break, especially in the early stages, because there's so much stress. And there's stress later, but I think things can evolve when companies scale that allows you to have more room and maybe different lanes. And so early days, I mean, you're literally, right? Figuratively or literally, you're all in one room and spending so much time together. So
do you think it's critical to have a co-founder? I mean, like there's obviously companies that don't have co-founders, because then you don't have that same, you're just the 100% boss and that's it. And you don't have to share it, but maybe you don't also share the stress the same way.
I think for a first-time founder, doing it by yourself is probably not the best idea for most people, and really, really hard, because I think there's so much emotional stress, and really you should be each other's like psychiatrists as you go to. Like you are the only person that you can really talk to, unless you have, of course, a coach or something, but your coach isn't like in it day to day with you. So going back to like why I think it's a support system, it should be the fact that you have different skill sets that are needed in the business. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't have done it by myself. And I think Dave said the same. There's no way he could have done it. So it was sort of like it worked because we were in it together. And the biggest thing really is, I think, trust and communication. And so when I get asked this question about working with my husband, et cetera, I'm like, if you really look at a lot of the strongest founder relationships that I can even think off the top of my head, they have a pre-standing relationship. They didn't just meet on Y Combinator generally, right? They were college roommates. They are a brother and sister. I've seen a lot lately of like the parent and the child that do a company together. Of course, there's the husband, wife. I met two co-founders 2 days ago in San Francisco, and they're identical twins, and they're sisters, obviously. So there's just lots of different co-founder dynamics, and a lot of them stem from having a deep trust of each other, knowing each other deeply, like the good, the bad, the ugly, all the things, and then really being able to communicate and be totally transparent and open. And that's probably the fault of those kind of relationships, the ones I just named, is we're probably too open with each other, because you have with your sibling or your parent or your husband or wife, you probably don't even have the filter that you would have. And that's good and bad. So like, I think it works both ways, but to me, that's what it's about, is the trust.
Yeah. So trust is critical for sure. And then, but also I think one thing, like, especially with the husband wife stuff, even siblings, they probably go back to their significant others or something and can still like get out of it. When it's like, hey, we're going to leave work, but we're going to go home. And like, I'm still frustrated at you because you didn't actually get done the thing you said you were going to get done today. And you're like, but I was stressed and focused in these other areas, and you can't really take a break. So how did you guys deal? Like, sure, you have that trust, but then how do you still take a break?
I mean, we didn't. Like, we should be candid, like we didn't. I remember in the early days of the company, we met another co-founder, married couple at something we were at. And they were like, oh, we don't talk about work from like 7 p.m. when we get home till the next day. And like, I think we tried it for like one day. I don't even think we got through one day. And then we're like, you know what? This is the choice we made, and it's totally chaotic and strange, but like, I don't know. We're just in it. So, I mean, you are constant, and so when things are great and there's a celebration and you have a win, it's like awesome, because you're there with the person that you are more connected to than anyone in the world, and you're celebrating and things are awesome and it's great. And then when things are bad, it's like real bad, right? It's amplified times 100, because you have to like deal with that constantly.
Yeah. And then, so co-founders are so critical also to another key part of any company, which is culture. Mm-hmm. So how did you guys manage, what sort of culture did you want to build? What sort of, like, did you even think through it? Like, what did culture look like in the early days? And then how has that changed over the past 12 years?
Yeah, I mean, the hustle was real. So, I mean, it was just like a different point in time. We were at the office every night till, 9 or 10 p.m. We were together every day, 5 days a week. I mean, we were one of our first offices. We were on a 3rd floor startup in like a live workspace, 12 of us, 15 of us. I mean, so it was really just like a hustle culture of daily stand-ups and getting things done and getting things going. And but I really think we always had a culture of building. Like, one of our core values today is still make it happen. So this idea of that doesn't matter what level you are, like you have an idea, or you want to accomplish something, like personally, like make it happen. But I think there was always also a sense of like leaving the prior day behind. So like another one of our values is every day is a new day. And from the very beginning, it was like, we're not going to fixate on what went wrong yesterday. Like, there's no value to that other than learning from it and moving on, but just, right, really a sense of optimism. And so I think the culture we had then is similar. I don't think anything's dramatically changed. I think the pace has changed a bit. Like, we're a bigger company. Like, we're hybrid. Like, I think the cultures evolved a lot during COVID, and continues to evolve.
How much thought, when you initially created a lot of these cultural milestones or things you believe in, like mission, vision, all those pieces, how much of that was pre-thought out early on versus it sort of evolved and you wrote it over the course of the first few years, and now it's just become like part of who you are?
It definitely evolved. It wasn't like a preset thing. We didn't even have any, like, I don't think we probably really wrote the values down. I'd have to go back, but I'm guessing it might have been even like 2015. So it might have been even a couple of years in that they were like pen to paper. And at that point, it was actually really easy. I think a couple of the highly tenured people who had been around, we all got down and we wrote everything down on a Post-it, like write down what you think the 5 most important, pieces of the ThirdLove culture are, and you put them on a whiteboard and you start grouping them. And it's very apparent, right? Like there's these couple buckets of things that are super important that were really clear. And then it's how do you articulate them? What do you specifically mean by those? How do these show up day to day? One of the ones that we added later on, like I forget which one we removed, but we have 5 values, but maybe a couple of years after we did the first round, we edited them a little bit. We changed them slightly. And then we added We're Stronger Together, which was more about collaboration and teamwork. And that wasn't something that was on the board when we were early stage, because when you're under 40 people, I mean, I'm not saying collaboration is not important, but you're kind of like, you have to collaborate because you're not that many people. And I do think when you get bigger, the idea of how you talk to people and how you collaborate and what information you share, it becomes a different conversation.
Would you do it differently today? In other words, what I mean by that is like, would you go back and say like early on, you'd want to like, let's like first year or two, like let's set those values, milestones, goals, mission, vision? Or do you think it's sort of doing it naturally and evolved is just as good?
I think if I was doing it today, I'd do it earlier. I think that we always had a mission statement. And so we definitely had a mission. I just don't know that we had like formalized company values. I would say they were informal versus formal. I'm talking about like, we monthly give an award based on one of our company values, that kind of thing. That feels more structured. And you can also do it with 10 people, right? Like you don't need to be huge to do that. So, but yeah, again, these are all like, that's why it's interesting when you think about having done a company 4 companies. Like if I had done 4 in this, like yes, I probably would do it. Or there's a lot of things that I think, are just lessons learned.
What, on the note of lesson learned, one of the other key parts of culture is, of course, the people you hire, right? Yeah. So thinking back to your earliest days, right? Even what I know of your history, I think maybe 1, maybe 2 people from very early days are still with you, but that's 12 years later. What are things what did you look to hire for in the early days? What did you learn, lessons learned from those early days? And then also, how has it evolved as you've changed as a company? And maybe actually, sorry, before you answer that, like, can you walk everyone through like how you guys have changed the company? So you were early, raised some money, you were 5, 10, 15, whatever people, you grew to pretty big, and then you cut back over time too. And so that type of company, you're a fast growing company, and then it changes. And so that probably changes who you recruit and how you recruit. But so what is the company like? What's that been journey from overall company? Then we can talk about hiring.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we were a D2C company in the heyday of D2C, where it was spend to grow top line, and don't worry about.
What you mean, like that's Facebook advertising, right? Spend to grow top line, put it on Facebook, put $1 in, you get $2 back from every purchase, et cetera, et cetera.
Grow the brand, push. And we, it started on Facebook because when we started advertising on Facebook, you couldn't advertise on Instagram. Of course, that changed over the life cycle. But so once we raised our B round, we were spending a lot on all, from top of funnel TV, linear TV, right, all the way down. I think we probably peaked at over 200 employees. At one point in time, we had just really big teams like across the board. And we were also building, in some ways, like building for the future where, you're not quite sure what their future holds, right?
No founder does, right? No founder really knows what the future holds to some extent.
Yeah. And, you're scaling and you're growing. And in the early days, it's like we were understaffed because we were growing so quickly. And then you're kind of like trying to grow for the next stage. And it's very easy to kind of get ahead of yourself. And I mean, really, this wasn't even D2C. I shouldn't even say that. I mean, it's pretty much any company that was founded by venture money between, call it 2010 and 2020, basically, up until COVID. That was the name of the game for the most part. So even all the tech B2B founders I've heard speak, I mean, the amount of people that they've kind of contracted back to is, I mean, sometimes it's like a third of like where they were, right? And so Yeah. And I think you get to a point when you're bigger and you realize like comms are harder, and like, are we really getting added value out of more employees? Like, are we generating more? Are we doing more? Are we more or less efficient? So having ridden that wave, and obviously we've sort of reset our business and we're slightly under 100 now. So it's definitely like and that's been over time. Um, but I feel like we're at the right number. Like, we're at the right number, and like things are working really well. So in terms of hiring and what, what that's looked like, um, in the early days, it was really about hiring like the scrappy generalist, right? It's the person who, I remember when we had one marketer, she did social and email and, right? And then at kind of the point that we were talking about, sort of the peak, we were really siloed. So we were hiring bigger company people who had more process, right? And then more siloed job functions. And now I think we've kind of come back and we're somewhere in between. But hiring's super hard. Hiring's the hardest thing I think that any founder does. You can learn along the way, but it's really hard. You don't really know until somebody starts. You think you do, but you don't always. And, sometimes I'm just like, what did I miss? It's really hard. And sometimes people you're not as sure about end up being rock stars too. So it is the human capital it's the wild card.
What are some hard-won lessons? I mean, I'm sure you've gotten better at hiring than you were 12 years ago. Yeah. What are hard-won lessons that you think like can be applied to any startup?
Trust your gut. So if your gut says no, don't hire them. You don't need an explanation. You're the founder. Just like, I feel like there's sometimes this need for me to be like, why, like, I need to like exactly articulate like why I think this isn't. And you know what? Like, I should have just been like, because I feel like those most of the time I look back and I'm like, I knew it. Like I should have just pushed more. So yeah, definitely trusting your gut. And I think references, like I am still shocked today by how many people don't call to do references.
Me too.
And the world is, like I have occasionally not done that as well for a variety of reasons. And it is like rule number one.
So how many references on a note? I mean, how many references do you require for every hire? What are they always? Are they former colleagues, former managers? How recent in the past are the references? What does that look like? It's sort of the rules that you follow at ThirdLove.
Yeah. I mean, I think here's the thing is that anyone can give really great references. Like, I mean, let's hope, right? So if I'm hiring somebody,
you'd be shocked when people give us references. Sometimes the references aren't that great. I'm like, this is the person you told us to go call.
Yeah. So I mean, that to me would be a huge red flag, right? Because you should have like raving references if you're the ones providing them. I mean, it should be the person, that should be stellar. I mean, for a more senior hire, I would look within my network to figure out, because they've probably worked 5 or 6 places. So who do I know? Do I know the founders from the other companies? Do I know other people who worked with them? Can I call them and say, hey, I know you weren't in this department, but was this, what do you know about so-and-so? And did you work with them at all? Because in particular, like retail is really small. So there's a lot of kind of crossover, and that's how you really, and it's not so much about like an aha moment. It's also really about just a cultural fit, right? Meaning it's very easy if I'm talking to another founder to describe the culture. Like it's scrappy, like there's no, they need to be a self-starter. Like how much guidance do they need? Because if they actually do need a lot of guidance and they come here, like it's not going to work. It's not going to be good for them or for, and so I think it's really about trying to get a little more information about someone than you might have gotten just from talking to them a couple times.
So do you guys do like 2 references, and then if they're senior, you're going to do 1 or 2 back channel references? Is there like a number you guys try to follow?
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah.
And then are there a set list of questions you guys also like to ask during the reference? It's like,
I always say like, of course it's like, would you hire this person again? And then second is like, what do I need to, what's super important to be the best manager to this person, right? Because you really need to understand like what style is going to work for them, because then it's kind of more applicable. Like, how's that going to work within the environment? So it also just depends on the role to some extent.
Are there also like, when you think through like the types of people you're hiring once again at different stages, you mentioned like people, you get bigger, you're hiring for sort of bigger, more skill sets, things like that. What are the risk rewards of doing that, right? Because there's certainly a mindset. Someone's like, well, I want to hire the person with all the experiences, all the skills, all the right credentials. Yet I've certainly seen that those people completely fail sometimes to start up. So what would be your recommendation for folks?
Where I am today, I'd always set on the side of like scrappier is better. Like the alternative, if I had to pick between the two, I would always pick the more like scrappy side, less big company. If I was presented with like two equal, like on every other level,
Yep.
I think it generally is the safer bet, because you also don't know what you're going to need. And there's so much change in a startup that oftentimes someone's role like evolves the second they walk in the door. There's something happening and this and that. And like anyone who's been through it before isn't like, oh yeah, they're like, totally, this, I get it. I've done it. Totally get it. But if you have somebody else who's like, oh my God, like it's a lot of emotional management.
And how do you define scrappy then too? Is it like if you've been in a big company, you're probably not that scrappy, or is it something deeper than that? It's like you've taken on a million different roles at a single company. You just go from like, what does that look? What does scrappy look like to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. It means not asking for like a lot of resources, because there's usually like a cheaper, faster way to do something, but it sometimes just requires literally using Google, phone a friend, ask somebody else. Like, I call people all the time to ask questions about things that I am trying to learn too. It's right. And so sometimes people don't do that. And so there's this, and I don't even know what you call that, but there's this idea of just don't take something at face value. You got to like dig a little deeper. Like, how did you do something in a way that might have not been like the obvious way to do it? Like, how did you deal with a workaround? I think that's one piece of it. And the other piece is, as things get thrown at you that you don't know how to do, like, how do you react? Like, and that it's kind of scrappy, but it's just more like startup-y. Like, there's this new project. Can you come and help? Like, sure, they don't know anything about it, but like, they're going to research and again, just like make it happen through what is available and move things along. And then like, yes, like completion of items.
So two different questions. I'll ask one first and move slightly off hiring and about sort of managing. But what percentage of the people today in hiring do you speak to still? Like, are you speaking to 100% of every single person who comes in the door who gets to like the final interview, or only a smaller percentage and more senior people?
Less people today, but I do feel like maybe I should, like even talking about with you today, this is what I mean. See, this is why it's like good to have the convo. I'm like, maybe I should be doing that again. I mean, I used to. There was a point in time where I met every single person. I think we did it maybe, was it right before we made them the offer, right after? We had a certain reason why we did it the way we did. But yeah, usually it'll be someone who's a bit more senior, like a senior manager and up. But given that we're not hiring a zillion people now, it's a good question.
Yeah, it's one. I mean, I ask the question to a lot of people because I see it go back and forth in many ways, and people are like, "No, you shouldn't." Like, it's not that important. On the other hand, if people is everything that is important, and you set the tone as a leader, there's a decent argument, even if it's a 15-minute call. Sure. I just want to get to know you, and like you still might say, "No, this person just isn't a fit," and your team might get frustrated because they put all this time and energy to getting them to that interview with you.
Yeah,
but that's okay. So on the note of sort of being scrappy as well, how do you like to manage people, and how has that changed? Like, what do you do from a quarterly planning perspective? What do you do from setting people up for tracking? Are they getting their projects done? Like, what did that look like once again, early days versus maybe how it's changed as you've grown?
Yeah, I mean, early days, we had no structure to it. I mean, I think we're truly building as we were going. And I don't even remember how we would do our financial planning. I mean, I don't know. It was totally chaos. And of course, it's like the last thing that you, I think, generally focus on. I think over time, we evolved to something that was more process driven with, real thought into like, what's the strategy for the next year, at least, what's the financial plan? Like a year and a half ago, I did my first ever 3-year plan, which was a fun exercise, just to say like, yeah, really where, what does 3 years out look like? And I'm sure like a lot of it will change, but it's kind of holding, the core elements are still holding halfway through it. So yeah. So, and I think it gets you in that mindset of outside of kind of the 3 months, 6 months. I feel like even Yeah, we're just all caught up in really what's happening today or like tomorrow. Um, but yeah, so really what we do is we have KPIs. I mean, of course we do basically OKRs, right? By team and then by individual. But what we really talk about at a company level and at a board level more are KPIs. So we have about probably 15 or 20 KPIs that are the most important things to us really hitting our plan. So something like traffic to our website, our product gross margin, and then we're tracking those on a monthly basis. So we can see where, because usually like the things that are harder and not working kind of like, at least in our business, they don't change overnight. So those are like would be focus areas. Like if our margin started to decline, we'd be like, okay, why? Like, why is it declining? What are we doing about it? How are we going to fix it? How long is it going to take? Is it going to impact the entire year? That kind of thing.
In what are the roles, sort of it's senior roles and also tracking the KPIs? Like, what are the roles you think are sort of most important, generally at a company, but certainly at like a company like ThirdLove? Like, is it a head of marketing, a head of HR, a finance person, like GC? What are the different roles? And then how does that also interact with your hat and changing your hat as a founder and leader too, right? Early days, probably you and Dave are doing everything.
Yep.
And then over time you start hiring different roles, but what is that progression and what do you think is best?
Yeah, the way I always say this to early stage founders, and I still stand by it, is that it actually, we can all do it today. It doesn't matter who you are and wherever, but I think, you get out a piece of paper and you write down, what are you good at and what do you love doing? And it's like 3, 5, 8 things, doesn't matter. Call it like under 10. Generally, what you like doing is usually what you're good at for the most part. And hopefully that holds true. I'd say like that. Let's hope that that's the case. And that's one side. And then on the other side of the paper, you need to say, at this company that I'm running right now, what does the company need to be successful in addition to all these things that I just wrote down on this piece of paper? And then it's another 3, 5, 8 things. And then you basically say, who can I hire who's excellent at these things? So for a lot of founders, especially maybe if they're creative, it's going to be an element of business or finance or ops or logistics and all of these things. And so it crystallizes sort of what you need. And so, yeah, in the early days of ThirdLove, I think we did a lot of everything and then started hiring functional experts where it was most important for our business. Our third co-founder, Rael, heads up design. Obviously, a bra lingerie designer is highly important and not a function that Dave or I possessed. So that was super important. And et cetera, et cetera. I've always leaned into marketing. So I've always run marketing to some extent or another. And I like it, I wouldn't say I'm the most qualified. And now I do actually have a great CMO, but that's the first time I've had a CMO in the history of ThirdLove is over the past year.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when do you update that list of yours, like on a regular basis? And like, cause the company's always changing, the needs are changing. People are leaving the company. She's like, well, now I need to take over this role because this person's left.
Yes. I think in particular, maybe not that exact list, meaning like your personal I mean, I think it depends on the stage of your company, but really what I say is like, if somebody's leaving the company, we really need to take a step back and articulate like, what was that person doing? Like, is that what we still need? And is there like a different, like, even like, should the role be called something else? Is it the right role still today? Is it the highest priority thing we need? Because you're right. Like, I feel like there's always, the idea of the instant backfill is like a total no. Like, there are no instant backfills. Like if there is an empty seat, it rolls up to the CEO and you look at it holistically as a dollar amount and what you need across the org. And somebody needs to be able to articulate like, and sometimes it's super clear, like, yes, we need this person, they left, and this is like, we need to basically hire the same person, but sometimes it's not.
How important, two things. One thing I learned from someone recently on another one of the episodes was they kind of keep a backlist of like people they kind of want to always hire, like just great people that are just always in touch with in case they're available. Yeah. Sort of, do you have something like that? And then related to that, do you sort of always have sort of backups ready? Like, hey, like if I could hire this great, no offense to your great CMO that you have, like, hey, there's these other marketers, just in case the CMO doesn't work out, there's these other people I don't want to do an instant backfill, but maybe they would come on board and be great.
I think if you have the time, like you should, like, I don't know. I have not done a great job of that, but I absolutely think I frequently talk to people where I don't have a role available if they look interesting, their background looks interesting, which is just good networking, right? To things, it's interesting how things kind of circle back. In fact, the CMO who I hired, I actually had reached out to and interviewed her for a role in ThirdLove years before when she was a senior exec, and it wasn't like the right time, and I didn't have the ability to hire somebody like her. So actually, I had talked to her in the past. So like a lot of it does end up coming back. It's like right time, right, right time, like right place. They have to be available. Yeah. I think the more you can do it, the better.
Do you like also then like when you think through the hiring piece and like looking for people for different, well, it's one thing for roles, but how do you handle sort of bar raisers? Like some companies, like you have companies that say like, I know Elon Musk run companies sort of always comes to mind. It's like, he's only going to hire theoretically the very best and he just doesn't care. And if you don't get it done, you're fired like immediately, basically. But I think a lot of companies, you just need people who are like going to be just really reliable, great people. And then there's some people who are the bar raisers, but like, how do you guys do that at ThirdLove? And what have you seen works really well with other colleagues who run great companies?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's always hard to judge a company from the outside in. Like, right. And you know a lot of founders too. So I always wonder, like you wouldn't really know until you're there, like until, I so I do think some of it is more positioning versus maybe actuality. I'm always curious about that. And I don't know how anyone would ever measure it. But yeah, no, I agree. I think it's you, you need all like B plus players. Like, you know how sometimes they'll be like, you need A or A plus. It's like, no, you need like BB plus is fine. Like, I think that is a great employee. And especially if they are culturally a good fit, they're positive, they uphold your company values, they represent you well, et cetera, whatever's important, those are worth it's. I think about it like a retail store. Like if the retail store breaks even, you still have the billboard on the outside. And
Yeah.
how much that value adds of seeing ThirdLove when you walk down Fillmore Street in San Francisco, I don't know what it's worth, but it's worth something. So as long as the store breaks even, it actually does make money. But as long as it breaks even, there's an inherent extra value. So I think about the same thing, right? With your team, it's just like they're either a detractor to the culture or they're an additive. And so that's a huge piece of what you're asking.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And going back actually to the early days, right? To almost go to kind of where we started, right? Thinking through why you became an entrepreneur in the first place in this person who has this amazing background, doing all kind of checking all the boxes, right? Like all the check boxes, right? Duke, MIT Sloan, McKinsey, et cetera, Google, all these other things. What was it once again that like really put you on that path? Because you could have easily been someone who's probably on a path to be like a super senior executive at an Aeropostale or these other companies, or even at Google, and would have made great money probably doing that. Maybe
Yeah.
even more in some ways than at ThirdLove. I mean, hopefully maybe not long term, but like
Right.
why take that path when it's being an entrepreneur is frankly a lot more risky and a lot less guaranteed?
I mean, I really like, I love at this point, I feel like it's like I love building and I love to some extent it's being in control. Like it's for better or for worse. And sometimes it's for worse, right? But you're really like you're in charge of your own destiny for the most part. Um, and I, to build something from nothing is really, really hard, right? And that's why most companies fail. It's like that's if it was so easy, everyone would be doing it, as we all always say. Yeah, I get to for me, that's where my heart lies now. I never would have known it unless I would have done it. There was no reason to think that this would have been the case, I think.
What would be the advice to other people who are thinking of becoming an entrepreneur and wanting to be a great entrepreneur like yourself? Is it to go give it a shot, or it's like, hey, like maybe don't do it unless you really feel energized by the idea?
It's a mixed bag. I feel as if I can suss out. I've made a decent amount, not a ton of angel investments, not nearly as many as you have, but there's something about, again, trusting gut and like someone's energy and just sort of how they talk about something. And I've invested in people where I'm legitimately, it's like the person, it's just like, you can tell they've got the hustle. Like their company may not be anything what they're telling you today, but they will figure it out. And it's a distinct thing. And so I think you have to try to, I think, and again, what I'm saying isn't crystal clear, but if you have that, then you should be doing it. But it's not for the faint of heart. And it's lonely, especially the early days. Like it's really lonely and it's really hard when you're in your own head. And it doesn't go away. I still have the moments of like self-doubt and all, it's just, it doesn't ever go away. It's really, really bad at the beginning. But it's always, there's a through line of that, always.
The challenges change, but they never disappear, if maybe a way of putting it. They're different every moment, but they're always ever present. What are the elements that also, like, when you think through like that founder journey, when you think through a lot of the founders that you're good friends with as well, what are some of the things that have made them really successful? Like, was it the luck of the draw, like right market, like right market, right place, right time? Was it that they are so resilient, that they are smarter than everyone else? Like, what are some of the elements, like, man, you're like a badass founder, like I would want to emulate you, sort of thing?
Yeah, I do think there is timing, but there's time, absolutely timing. But then I just question, of late, I've also thought about, well, maybe they were smarter because they thought through timing better and had more thoughtful check-ins with themselves about timing and the market and where they were. Because I definitely don't think I did that in the early days. So that would definitely be advice I'd give to people, is like, you have to be really honest with yourself about like your company and where you are, and what you want. And because if you don't actually think about and plan for it, you're just like on a boat and the boat is like sailing where the wind's taking you, right? But if you want to be in control of it to some extent, and you can't control everything, there are things you can do and not do strategy wise, and how much money you raise. And if you think about if you want to sell or not want to sell, or you want to go, all these things, like if you're more thoughtful, then maybe you are the one who, like, at the end of the day, looks smarter from the outside because you actually thought about it and you guided that. Now, I'm sure there's some luck of the draw, like the phone rings and et cetera, but like probably not that frequently, right? So yeah, I think being maybe a little more thoughtful, like I've just seen founders be better at who they brought in for their strategics, like their angels, right? If you bring in the right strategic, they might be the company that ends up acquiring you in full at some point, right? Like there's just things you can do along the way that are great additive things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When you think through biggest mistakes in some ways that maybe you've made at ThirdLove, are there any like ones that really come to mind? Like, man, I wish I hadn't done that, or I had done that differently, or like, how do you think through what are the big ones? Like, man, I just, if I knew better, I would have done that differently.
It's interesting because even when it was like the heyday of spending, I always said to myself, and it was kind of a joke, and I would even joke about it when I would be on podcasts. I'd be like, isn't the goal of like a consumer company that you sell your product for more than it costs to like make it or service it? Like, isn't that like a true business? Like, to me, it always seemed odd that it was acceptable that like a consumer business wasn't profitable. And if I just would have like leaned into that more and been the anti, like I might have had $10 million more in the bank today, right? Now, easier said than done in hindsight's, right? Like, but I do think generally we've been very capital efficient, but every dollar you spend you need to think about, and you need to have a team that thinks about it, because you're either spending the dollar today or you're going to spend the dollar at a different point in time. And is today the right moment to spend that dollar on that hire, on that marketing investment, on that thing, or maybe is it not? And yeah, and so I wish I would have just maybe been a little harsher on some of that, scaled less quickly, people wise and process wise. Just, yeah, I think just those things would have just been practical.
How do you know when it's penny wise and pound foolish versus like it's something I should spend on? Because I come across plenty of founders like, I'm going to be really careful with all my dollars, and they're really careful with that front, but then they're spending so much time doing all the work themselves, and that's your time arguably is the most precious thing you have.
100%. So yeah, it really depends on when we think about the list that we've created about what we're great at. Usually those are the things that we should be spending almost all our time on as well, because really you're either the person running that, doing that, the strategy, and like that's where the value comes. And then really also the other thing is then that list of like the other things that are important, or the other things could be the third list is like, what are the other ways you spend your time? Right. Because usually there's a way to solve a bunch of that stuff. And yes, you should, especially today. I mean, it's easy to outsource. You have all these AI tools. I mean, the world has changed so much that you have to be, and you have to be constantly innovating to say like, what's new? Like, how am I being more efficient with my time?
How did then you try to focus your own day? Like what is a day in the life of Heidi look like even today versus maybe 10 years ago? What is that organization? How do you decide what to focus on when and why?
I have a running to-do list, and it's bigger things than the to-do list. So like either more strategic things, or mostly more strategic things that aren't like, I'm going to knock off in 15 minutes kind of thing. So I would say the first hour or something is email and responding to stuff and reading business updates and stuff like that, like every single morning. Then obviously the day you don't, I know, do very many meetings. I'll have some amount of meetings. And then in between that, I'm really like looking at the to-do list, being like working through at least a couple things on there, so that hopefully every week, like in an ideal world, because I'm always adding one or two things, I'm trying to cross off one or two things. It's never empty. And then I sometimes like I'll shift around the priority.
So is that an actual like list that you've written out and be like, this is
Yeah.
on my list, like reprioritize and moving around?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's short and it's nothing, but it reminds me of like, oh yeah, like there's a couple big short, and they're the things like, again, if I look at that list, what I can tell you now is there's not one person on my exec team doing any of those things. And there shouldn't be, because they would be doing them and I wouldn't be. But like at the end of the day, like they're important things that I'm the one who's going to need to do them. So yeah, I think really thinking about how are you spending your time in a way that is different from the rest of your team and super value add to driving revenue and growth or profitability or whatever you're trying to do.
So those are like essentially only items that you can do basically.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah. Or something I need to kick off to like get it to a place that I can actually hand it off to like get it going.
So,
Yeah.
so on that note of like list of priorities, then how do you think through as well, like work-life balance or having time outside of work? What does that even look like? Is that even possible to some extent? Certainly, once again, being married to your co-founder makes it a little bit more difficult, but like, what does work-life balance look like for you? And what's going to also all the people, you know, or what is that breakdown?
Yeah, I always say there's different buckets of life if you think about it, right? There's personal, meaning stuff for you. There's your family, like whatever that may look like. There's your friends. And there might be community, or there are other things that are important in people's like vectors of like who they are and all the people they touch. But one of them is distinctly like your own self, like your hobbies, your whatever, your you working out, whatever those things are. And so you never, of course, is one of those as well. And so you're never going to do all of them at a really high level all the time at the same point in time, right? Meaning you're never going to be an A on every area every single day or every single week. Like or at 100%. You could pick one or two things, right? But that's how life works. So, because if I'm going to prioritize seeing friends this week, like or weekend, probably more likely, like I'm going to deprioritize seeing my kids. It'll be a trade-off that I'll make. And I will make it sometimes when I go away for the weekend and leave them at home. Right. But you're actually making a trade-off, and work is the same. It's like, we could all work all the time and it'd be never ending, but we're not going to do that. So to me, it's really about what are the boundaries you put on, and how do you think about toggling between what's important any one day or any one week and that kind of thing.
How does that change for you though, right? I mean, especially if you could make the argument that as an entrepreneur, you probably need to be really, really focused on a regular basis. Like almost your number one on an almost regular basis, daily basis, maybe should be your company. And maybe that's all you're thinking about generally. So like, then how do you prioritize the other elements? And then also find time to make sure you can be good at that number one priority. Because sometimes it means like, I'm going to turn off my brain and not think about work. And I'm going to take time to read a book or go on a trip. Like how do you prioritize or focus those elements?
Yeah. I mean, I think you, like I said, I think you make trade-offs. Like I think there was a long time when my kids were little and the company was early stage, like I didn't have like a social life really for a couple of years. Like I don't even remember it. It's totally like a blur to me. I don't even know what happened for 3 or 4 years, to be candid. And I'm at a different point now because so but it's like, that was fine. And I was okay with that. And so it was just meant other things didn't happen as much. And I had done triathlons and spent all this time. I mean, think about it. I was probably spending 20 hours a week doing triathlon training, like or 15 hours or something. And that went to the company and the kids. And so I stopped doing triathlons. Like, I mean, and I've really done them since, but I think there's those, I think you make marked things, or you get to a point, and I'm in that point in this journey where it's like, I need to work out every day. Like, I need time for myself. And that's a huge priority for me. And if I don't get an hour of work done, it's one less hour I worked. That's okay. Because like, I've been doing this 10 years and I need to prioritize personal health to be a great CEO, and I'll be a great mom and partner and all those other things. So, but I always say to people, you need to take control. Like, you are in control of how you spend your time. Don't be the person being like, oh, this and that. Like, take control, block off your schedule, tell people how you're spending your time. Like, this is how much I generally work unless there's an emergency. And then I am totally available. But like, whatever your boundaries are, like, take control of your schedule and your life so that it works for you.
When you say take control, I kind of hear sometimes like say no. Is that a maybe different way of saying, like, it's actually saying like, be able to say no and be comfortable with that?
Yeah. Like, I feel like we've talked about like food, like how does dinner get on the table? Like, who's in charge of that? Is it a priority? Like, how does that happen? Like, take control of the situation and like make it into something that works. Like, you can't be everything to everyone. I do say no a lot. I don't travel a ton. I try not to travel a ton. I find that's a really big time suck to some extent. And I will travel for things that are important, but I travel a lot less now than I used to. And yeah, I think sometimes you just have to say no to events. Like, do you need to go to a conference for a day or two? Like, sometimes it's great to go to network, to take a break, to be creative, to listen to other people. But like, how many times a year do you need to do that? Right. So, yeah.
And do you think that if you could take what you've learned and who you are today, would you apply that to the Heidi of 12 years ago? Or no, just because like would you say like, hey, Heidi of 12 years ago, be healthier and do these things in a different way? Or
100%, because I don't necessarily think that all of the things I did or stressed about even, or like, I think I could have done it in a more holistic way. I do. Yeah. But again, if you haven't done it, it's kind of hard to tell somebody.
It is, but that's hopefully the whole point of this. Like, how do you do it the right way? And like,
Yeah.
it's not a sprint, it's a marathon to building a company.
Correct.
It's not everything is the best ones are sort of the 10-year or 12-year overnight success, right?
Yeah.
Is what a lot of people talk about.
You meet a lot of people and they're burnout and they're really tired and they're unhealthy and they've really prioritized the company above all else. And like, that's not an answer either. Right. And so I think there's a balance, and in today's world, it's more expected than it was too. So it is a different it's a different world now than it was 10 or 12 years ago.
For sure. And it will be a different one in 10 or 12 years from now. When you think through a single piece of advice, so I asked every single person at the end of the podcast recording, what is your single piece? If you had to boil all this down into one bit of advice that you would give to entrepreneurs, what is that sort of one-liner or single piece of advice you'd say, if you want to be an excellent entrepreneur and have the most success, which by the way, I forgot to ask you to define. So actually, before I answer the question, I'll give you an extra second to think about it. We did talk about success or sort of excellence, but what does success mean? Like, how do you define success for yourself? What does it look like for a lot of your colleagues? I think a lot of people might say money, but frankly, I've heard a lot of great entrepreneurs not say success is equal to money. There's a lot of other things. So what does success look like for the Heidi Zak of today? Maybe what did it look like for the Heidi Zak of 12 years ago? And how did that impact the excellence that you achieve as a founder?
Yeah, I with hearing so many no's and it being such a struggle in the early days to gain traction and fundraise, it was really about proving people wrong. There was really, and I think that's a lot of founders. Like, I'm going to
like a chip on your shoulder almost.
Total. Like, this, whoever said blah, 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 like, they're going to rue the day. And so a lot of it's about just, that. And now today, like I said, to me, it's more about the impact we make, like the brand recognition, in the sense of when I meet someone, they're like, oh my God, I love ThirdLove. Here's why. And I just got a a text from a friend today and she said, oh, the underwear you gave me, and I just had surgery and it's so comfortable. And that's not why you design it, but like it really like made post-surgery like so much better. Right. So it's just like these ideas of like how you're touching people in these ways that you didn't even like set out to do, but in essence you're doing. So the brand is bigger than the product too. And so that to me is success. And then hopefully future success is the brand that it does exist in 30, 50. I mean, as we say, 100-year brands, I mean, that's a bit excessive, but right, with a generational brand and company is still my hope and dream. What would I give is the one piece of advice? This is always so hard, and I don't actually have a canned answer. So I'm still thinking about it. It's really hard. I mean, really what I would say is, and this is a very different answer than I think I've given in the past. I think be grateful and enjoy the ride. You know?
That is a great piece of advice. And is there an element of that though? How does someone step back from things and be grateful? Because once you're in it, it's very easy to get lost as well. So
totally.
How do you do that?
I mean, I think about this every morning now. I don't meditate. I'm not good enough to do that. I hope to do it at some point or another.
You and me both.
Yeah, right. Like someday I will meditate, but I do every single day, usually when I'm in the shower. What else? Unless you're thinking about like crazy business ideas too, which isn't.
Some of the lawyers do. They charge you for that the time in the shower for their work. But yes, most people do.
Totally. I try to think about like, what am I grateful for?
Yeah.
And, you know, you can think business and professional and as well as like your personal life. And I do feel like if you reframe around that, you're like, it just reminds you of like why you do what you do every day. And like the fact that you're lucky to like wake up and have that ability to do those things and impact people and build something. And then it has like a much more positive like entryway into the world of like whatever's going to go wrong that day.
Yep. And there will be something, but I also agree. Like I feel so lucky to be grateful for the things that I can wake up and be able to do this stuff and talk to amazing entrepreneurs like yourself. So on that note, Heidi, how can people get in touch? How can they find you? How can they learn more about ThirdLove?
Yep.
Where they
thirdlove.com. We have some stores. We're in Neiman Marcus, but mostly thirdlove.com. I'm Heidi Zak on LinkedIn, and then at Heidi on Instagram.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the time. It is our most precious resource. So thank you for spending some of it with me.
So fun. Great questions.